Chirst Gla Catanta by Johann Sebastian Bach. Before we do anything else with this work, let's take a moment to firm up a few details of Bach's biography. I'm sure I've mentioned these to you before, but I need to make them explicit because one of your tasks in this unit is to be able to tell one composer apart from another, to tell Bach apart from Handel. And in fact, this is very easy to do. Handel worked most of his career as an impresario, basically for himself, whereas Bach was always employed by others. Handel's work was independent. He was an impresario, as I've already mentioned. Bach, however, always worked in one of two capacities, either as a church musician or as a court musician. We recall that Handel was not a good court musician. And whereas Handel made most of his adult career outside his native German north, Bach never traveled outside the German principalities. So keep these things in mind when you're distinguishing these two composers. And in fact, it can help you not only sort out the details of their biographies, but it can also help you to focus on what kinds of compositions they wrote. For example, the next two compositions that we're going to examine by J.S. Bach are types of works that Handel never composed. And the reason for this is simple. Handel never worked as a church musician. Now let's take a look at the first of two works by Bach on the Luther chorale, Chirst Gla Catanta. These two works are distinguished by their performing forces, and in fact you'll be provided with the performing forces for each of these compositions on the test so you can tell one apart from the other. This setting of Chirst Gla Catanta by J.S. Bach is scored for choir, orchestra, and basso continuo, a fairly large ensemble. In terms of genre, this composition for choir, orchestra, and basso continuo is a cantata. Cantata is an Italian past participle. It comes from the Italian verb cantare, which means to sing. Therefore, cantata means sung. Notice that the title or the generic designation is somewhat ironic because although this is a sung composition, it does have instrumental accompaniment in it. The cantata is a genre that is most often used in church services. Yes, there are secular examples of such works, but they are very few indeed. And when such pieces were written for use in church services, they normally took one of two forms. Sometimes a cantata could take the form of a mini oratorio, basically a type of composition that is essentially a drama and that uses the same types of music as found in an opera. When Bach was not writing cantatas of this sort, he wrote cantatas of another sort, one that could be based on a chorale melody, and in that case the genre of the composition is a chorale cantata, and this is exactly what we're going to see today when we take a look at his cantata on Chirst Gla Catanta, a composition based on an existing chorale melody. Bach wrote well over 200 cantatas for church use. Actually, I should specify that we have about 200 cantatas by Bach that survive. Chances are he wrote at least 4 times this number of such compositions during his very long career as a church musician. Cantatas were a regular part of German Lutheran church services during the 18th century, and they were normally performed before the sermon. They were basically on the subject of the sermon for the day, and they must have been a very welcome addition to these very long church services. If you were a German Lutheran of the Pietist sect in the northern German-speaking part of Europe, you would have gone to church on Sunday mornings at about 7 o'clock, and you would have emerged from the church service sometime around noon. We are going to take a detailed look at the setting of 3 stanzas in this cantata, stanzas 3, 4, and 7. You have the chorale melody at hand, so please refer to it. If you take a look at both the German and the English text that you see here, you will see that the melody breaks up into short phrases. This is typical of chorales or Protestant hymns in general. Bom, 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 bom. Second phrase. Bom, 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 bom. As you can see, the phrases are short and the melody is very singable as a result. Knowing that Bach presents the melody of the chorale in these short phrases will help you to understand what he is doing in each of these movements. In stanzas 3 and 4, being able to listen to and to identify these phrases will help you to understand what the composer is doing. In fact, in these 2 stanzas what we have is a type of setting or a type of technique or approach to composition that we saw in the very first unit of this course. Both of these works are cantus firmus settings of the chorale melody. The word cantus firmus should ring a bell. It means fixed song, and it was the existing liturgical melody on which medieval composers based their elaborate polyphonic settings called organum or isorhythmic motet. Here Bach does exactly what his medieval predecessors did. He sets the cantus firmus, or the existing song, in this case the Luther chorale, Chirst Lag and Totus Banden. He sets it in long, slow notes against counterpoints that are written in shorter, faster notes. As you can see, the more things change, the more things stay the same. And in fact, composers are still writing cantus firmus settings of melodies. The next time you hear a purely instrumental composition, for example, a marching band composition for marching band, in which a familiar melody is presented in long, slow notes with shorter, faster moving notes against it, chances are you are hearing a cantus firmus setting. Stanza 3 of the Bach composition presents the cantus firmus sung in long, slow notes by the tenor against shorter, faster moving notes of the counterpoints played by a violin. And in stanza 4, the cantus firmus is sung in relatively long, slow notes by the alto voice, and the soprano, tenor, and bass voices provide the shorter, faster moving counterpoints sung against it. The setting of stanza 7 in this cantata presents us with another type of music that is familiar to us. It is a simple chorale harmonization. We encountered the harmonization at the beginning of Unit 2 of this course with the harmonization of the hymn Ave Maris Stella by Guillaume Dufay. And here we find a composition that sounds very much like it. In terms of texture, it is homophonic. All the voices move more or less together. The voices therefore lose their individual identity, and as the name itself, homophonic or homophony, says, they blend into one and the same sound. And like the Dufay harmonization, the melody is placed in the soprano, and 3 new melodies are written to be sung against it. Bach is very famous for these harmonizations today. In fact, almost all those thick hymnals that I've referred to earlier have 1 or more harmonizations of Bach chorales in them. Also, Bach chorale harmonizations are a staple in music education. Musicians today learn how to harmonize melodies by studying the Bach chorales. In fact, I took a number of courses as an undergraduate in which the only text was a copy of the Bach chorales.